Welcome guys. Today we're going to be looking a little bit more at cells. Specifically we're going to be looking at the organelles that are found within cells. Of these organelles that we're going to be looking at, most of them are found only in eukaryotic cells, which would be plant or animal. Some of them are found in prokaryotic cells, such as bacteria. So we're going to take a look at those today and what their functions are. So previously we spoke of prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells, and we identified that prokaryotic cells are simple, they do not have a nucleus, they're small, they're unicellular, the DNA is found in the cytoplasm, and we identified that bacterial cells are an example of those. Plant and animal cells are going to be our focus moving forward. They are eukaryotic organisms, which means that they do have a nucleus. DNA is found within that nucleus. There's organelles. The organelles have a function. They can be unicellular, they're multicellular, they reproduce sexually or asexually. So we're going to be looking at these cells moving forward today. Since we're going to be talking about organelles, it'd be a good idea to establish exactly what an organelle is. So on your screen there you can see the function. Or the description. An organelle, it's part of a cell that has a job. They're called organelles because that translates to tiny organs. So we can kind of think about these in the same fashion that we think of the organs within our own bodies. Our heart, it's an organ and it has a job. It does a job that no other part of our body does, and that's pump blood. Our stomach, it's part of our body, it's an organ, it has a job. No other organ in our body has the same job that the stomach does. So we're going to be looking at the tiny organs found within cells and what their role within the cell is. Here we see a picture of an animal cell. The nucleus is this big purple ball that is characteristic of eukaryotic organisms. Some of the other organelles that we see in this picture would include the cell membrane, which we've already spoken about, made up of phospholipid bilayer. Mitochondria, spoke about that with cellular respiration. Other ones would include cytoskeletons, which are these string-like things, the Golgi Apparatus, the Nucleolus, right in the center of the nucleus, the Endoplasmic Reticulum, there's the rough, and then there's the smooth. They have separate functions. Lysosomes, and kind of cut off here, these tiny ones are ribosomes. Those are some of the organelles that we're going to be looking at within an animal cell. And if we look at a plant cell, we're going to see a lot of those same organelles. Nucleus, Golgi Apparatus, cytoskeleton, cytoplasm, I'm not sure if that was shown in the previous image or not, mitochondria, rough ER, smooth ER, ribosomes. What we do see on here is the plasma membrane, which is the cell membrane. So plant cells do have a cell membrane. But we see a few differences within the plant cell that we did not see in the animal cell, namely the cell wall right here, which is a very thick layer, thicker than the plasma membrane or cell membrane. We also have chloroplast. We spoke about chloroplast with photosynthesis. And then lastly, the central vacuole, which is this big, large bubble. We see those in plant cells only. Those are not found in animal cells. And then looking once again at a prokaryotic cell to establish what we mean by simple. We really don't see those organelles here that we saw with the animal and plant cell. There is the cytoplasm, that's a similarity. There are these ribosomes. There's a cell membrane or a plasma membrane, and there is a cell wall. But aside from that, in terms of the organelles, the other ones are not found within the bacterial cell. So now we're going to take a look at each of those organelles, identify if they're found in plant cells or animal cells or both, and what their job is. And we're going to do this starting with the central vacuole. As we saw in the previous slides, this organelle is found only in plants. There are some vacuoles that exist in animal cells, but they're much smaller, and those are used for a different role than the central vacuole within plants. We know that plants have to take up water and they have to store water, especially succulents like cactus that have to go a long period of time. Here in the desert where it's hot and dry, no water. So the purpose of the central vacuole is to store water. And in plants like succulents, they can store water for a very, very long time and go months on end without water. This isn't the case with every single plant. It just happens to be the plants that are characteristic of deserts. Once again, only found in plants. Next, we have the cell wall. This is also, as we saw, found only in plants. We did see it in the prokaryotic bacterial cell, but recall we're only really talking about eukaryotic cells in this presentation. It's found only in plants. The function of the cell wall is to surround the cell and kind of give it a shape, and we can kind of liken that to some of the freeways and highways that we have here within Phoenix, namely the 101. If you go around the 101 here, if you're within that area, that's kind of like the valley, right? But once we step outside the 101 and go beyond those boundaries, we're no longer really inside that valley. We're kind of going to the outreaches of our area. So the cell wall, it does surround the entire cell of a plant, and you've probably felt the cell wall when you've pinched the stem of a flower. Sometimes you can't pinch it, like if you're trying to pinch the stem of a rose, that's really, really tough, but with some softer ones, you can pinch it and you can actually feel the crunch within the stem of the flower. What you're actually feeling snap and crunch is the cell wall kind of breaking apart between your fingers. So the cell wall, once again, in plants, surrounds it, gives it a shape, and in order to get in or out of a cell, stuff has to go through that cell wall. We spoke of the cell membrane previously. Lipid bilayer, phospholipid bilayer, controls what enters or exits cells, soft, flexible, has a polar head, non-polar tails, which creates that bilayer arrangement that we saw. That cell membrane, it is found in both plant and animal cells, and it is similar to the cell wall in that it surrounds the entire cell. It is similar to the cell wall in that it controls what can enter or exit the cell, but the difference between the cell membrane and the cell wall is that the cell membrane, as we saw, is fluid mosaic. It's flexible. The cell wall, not so much. It's rough, firm, it's rigid, but the cell membrane, it is flexible, and as a result of being flexible, is a lot thinner than the cell wall. Chloroplast. We spoke of the chloroplast when we were talking about photosynthesis, or when plants use the energy from sunlight to create glucose, which is why I put pictures of solar panels on the slide. They do a very similar job that chloroplasts do in that they use energy from the sun, they collect it, and then they change that energy into something else. In the case of these solar panels, they change it into energy that we could use for electricity or something of the sort. And with the chloroplast, they capture that sunlight and they convert it into that sugar glucose. Next is the nucleus. The nucleus we discussed is found in all eukaryotes, which would include both plant and animal that you would find these in. Going inside the nucleus, you would see that's where DNA or chromosomes are located. We'll be talking about DNA and chromosomes later on. And the main function of the nucleus, considering the significance of DNA in our bodies, it really dictates everything that cell does. So it's kind of like Michael Scott here. If you are a fan of The Office, he is the boss. He kind of controls what goes on in his office. The nucleus controls what goes on in its own cell, in its own office, so to speak. Looking inside the nucleus is a dense region known as the nucleolus. Don't get those two terms mixed up. It is part of the nucleus. In the nucleolus, this begins the assembly of proteins, and it does so kind of by providing a blueprint. And if you've seen these before, you should know that blueprints are detailed instructions. It identifies exactly how something should be assembled. In the case of what the nucleolus is doing, it's of how those proteins should be assembled. So if you think back to the macromolecules or carbon-based poster that we were doing, we made a protein by linking together amino acids. Dehydration synthesis formed those bonds. And the sequence of nucleotides, or not nucleotides, the sequence of amino acids from your poster to your partner's poster, your neighbor's poster, they may have been different sequences. So ultimately, what's determining what is the correct order? Well, whatever instructions are provided by the nucleolus. So once the nucleolus has provided the blueprint or instructions for how a protein should be assembled, or the sequence of amino acids, that blueprint is then sent to the ribosomes, which would be in kind of like construction workers. They would take that blueprint and they would follow it to a T. They would do everything that the instructions told them to do. In this case, it's how should the rest of the protein be assembled. Ribosomes, they are found in plant and animal cells. They are found in eukaryotes. But if you recall back to our discussion previously, they are also found in prokaryotes as well. Moving along, we have the mitochondria or mitochondrion. They're found in eukaryotes as well, so they're both in plant and animal, which might seem kind of weird because we know that the mitochondria from cellular respiration uses food to create energy from the cell. It creates a lot of ATP. Photosynthesis does not actually create energy for plant cells. It creates glucose. It is the mitochondria that then uses that glucose, breaks it apart, releasing a bunch of ATP. So mitochondria is found in both plant cells as well as animal cells. Plant cells just have chloroplasts, animal cells do not. Reason being, we can eat our own food. Plant cells, they need to create their own. The cytoskeleton. This is found in plant and animal cells, so all eukaryotes. It is a thick protein, and like the name suggests, it kind of forms a skeleton of a cell. And looking at this right here, we can see that this cell, because of the shape of the cytoskeleton, it kind of has a boxy shape to it. This one kind of has, I guess you could call that boxy, but that's the shape of this cell. So cytoskeletons, they ultimately dictate the shape of a cell. The Golgi Apparatus is similar to the post office. Its job is to take things that come into the cell or things it needs to remove from the cell, and it kind of determines where those things need to go and kind of make sure they get there. Found in both plant and animal cells. They do kind of change things up before things are sent off and away. So it does modify and sort and package things like proteins. A cell might make some proteins and then send them to different cells, and that's the Golgi apparatus' job, is to make sure they're ready for shipment and that they get where they are supposed to go. Next is the endoplasmic reticulum, or the ER. There's two divisions of the ER. One is smooth, one is rough. The difference between the smooth and rough is the appearance. And if you take a look at the slide or the picture of the ER, you'll notice that the rough ER has ribosomes attached to it, which kind of gives it a sandpaper-like appearance. Well, the presence or absence of those ribosomes ultimately dictates the function. We know already that ribosomes help build proteins, and that happens to be the job of the rough ER. The smooth ER does not have proteins or ribosomes, so it does a different job. It kind of detoxifies drugs and break things down. And if you look at liver cells, the liver detoxifies alcohol and removes it from your body. Since those cells do that job, the cells of the liver are going to have a lot of this organelle. They are specialized for their job. The last organelle we're going to look at are lysosomes. The job of these guys are like a garbage truck. They come and pick up and remove stuff, namely waste products. It could be organelles that are kind of old and worn out, just kind of need to be removed. You can imagine what your house would be like if you left the trash inside and never took it out. It would become a waste landfill. That's what would go on inside your cell if lysosomes were not there to do that. Next thing I wanted to touch on is that not all cells are the same. Whenever you see a picture of an animal cell, it's going to look like that one I showed you at the beginning of the lesson. Well, here we have smooth skeletal muscle, skin, and red blood cells, all very different, all different jobs. And since they have different jobs, The organelles you would find in each are different and in different quantities.